There are lives in which the spotlight is only the smallest visible tip of the iceberg, and Andrea Bocelli's is one of them. A man who sings in darkness, who softens millions of hearts with a single sustained note, yet carries within him a private world that is complex, tender, turbulent, and so beautiful it almost feels unreal. Behind that prayer-like tenor voice are two women who quietly carried him through two halves of his life, three children who helped redefine what love and legacy can mean, and a home where music is not a profession, but the very air everyone breathes. The world sees Bocelli beneath the blazing lights of ancient cathedrals, sold-out stadiums, and legendary concert stages. But very few know that his truest light lives in the simplest moments. A family dinner in a Tuscan kitchen, the warm, low piano notes played by his eldest son as night settles in. The moment an 8-year-old girl stood trembling beside her father to sing Hallelujah during a pandemic live stream. Or the quiet letters addressed to a past where a woman once chose to leave without taking a single ounce of resentment with her. Bocelli's private life is not the shock, scandal, or sensational revelation audiences often expect. It is a story of choices, choosing forgiveness over hurt, choosing peace over conflict, choosing kindness even when fame threatens to pull everything into chaos. At the center of it all are two figures who shaped the emotional destiny of his life. One who lit his first flame when he was a blind young man playing piano in bars to earn his tuition, and another who entered his world when the spotlight had grown too harsh, pulling him back toward a gentleness he thought he had lost forever. From these two women came three children, each carrying a different shade of light. Amos, calm and contemplative, seeing the world through both intellect and a rare quietude. Mateo, passionate and warm, singing as if trying to step closer to the heart of a father admired by millions. And Virginia, the late but radiant gift, whose sweetness brightens the entire home in a way only a child can. If the story of Bocelli's life has often been told as a journey from darkness to greatness, then the story you are about to enter is the other half the public rarely sees. The journey from greatness back to the hearth. From the stage, lights, back to the glow of family. The very light that has sustained him for half a century. For sometimes, to understand a legend, you do not look at where he shines the brightest, but at the people standing behind him. Those who never step into the spotlight yet are the very reason the stage can shine at all. This is the story of two women, three generations, and the kind of light that has defined Andrea Bocelli far more than any aria ever could. And if you are ready, the door to his private world is opening. A world where love, family, and music blend into a single radiance that darkness can never extinguish. Before the world knew Andrea Bocelli as a tenor capable of shaking the dome of the Milan Cathedral, he was simply a 29-year-old blind young man sitting behind an old piano in a small bar in Pisa, playing music to pay for school and quietly living by heart rather than by sight. And it was in that humble place, amid cigarette smoke curling toward the ceiling and the chatter of people oblivious to the fingers running across the keys, that a 17-year-old girl stopped, not out of curiosity, but because his voice held her still, as if an invisible force had reached out and anchored her in place. Her name was Enrica Cenzati, and that moment, unnoticed by everyone else, marked the beginning of the purest and most beautiful love chapter of Bocelli's life. He could not see her, yet he sensed her presence more vividly than any face he had ever known. He once said that when he sings, sometimes he instinctively knows who in the room is truly listening. Because a strange quietness, gathers around that person. And on that night, the only true listener was Enrica. Years later, she recalled that something in his voice made her feel as if she were seeing the soul of a man she had never met. No glamour, no fame, no spotlight, only a voice full of wounds, yet so warm one could not help wanting to stay beside it. Their love unfolded in a way only two unguarded souls could understand. Without many words, without dramatic confessions. A young girl just stepping into adulthood and a blind man carrying his insecurities found each other through sound, through unforced tenderness, and through a kind of understanding no eyes could ever deliver. They dated for 5 years, short in time, but long in the hardships they had to learn to overcome. Enrica believed in Andrea long before he believed in himself. She encouraged him to leave law school, to study classical singing under Franco Corelli, to face each decision he feared. She helped pay his tuition with part-time jobs and watched over every small step he took while navigating the world through darkness. Put simply, she gave him the sky an artist needs to be born a second time. In 1992, they married in a small, quiet ceremony, as gentle and unassuming as the nature of their love. Enrica wanted no glittering life. She wanted a home filled with music and the man she had chosen. And in that home, nestled in Tuscany, 2 children were born, Amos in 1995 and Matteo in 1997. Enrica became the keeper of their family rhythm, cooking, raising the children, driving them to school, teaching them, waiting, while Andrea took his first steps into a career no one imagined would one day carry him across the world. But it was here that the first cracks began to form. As fame approached their door, as Bocelli was invited to tour across Europe, as the man who once sang in a bar now stood before tens of thousands, the rhythm of their lives slowly fell out of sync. Enrica was introverted, drawn to quiet, uneasy with crowds. Andrea, though not a lover of noise, was pushed by fate into a world where the spotlight was impossible to escape. She stayed home with 2 small children, while he moved constantly between Rome, London, and New York. There were nights when the dinner she prepared for him cooled, untouched, then had to be thrown away. It was no one's fault. It was simply life colliding with love in the cruelest way. Not through betrayal, but through distance. In 2002, after 10 years of marriage, they divorced in silence. No scandal, no accusations, no bitter interviews, no tears on television. Only 2 people who had once loved each other deeply, realizing they could no longer walk the same path. Enrica left without carrying any anger, and Bocelli, even now, speaks of her with a rare reverence, as a woman who walked with him through the hardest years anyone else could have abandoned. After the divorce, Enrica disappeared from the public eye almost completely. No social media, no interviews, no remarriage, no red carpet appearances. She lived just a few minutes from Bocelli's home so their sons could see their father whenever they wished. And one detail that moves anyone who learns it. In 2014, when Bocelli married Veronica, Enrica attended the wedding, not for ceremony, but for love, for the children they shared, and perhaps also for the peace she had chosen from the very beginning. If Bocelli's life were a symphony, Enrica would be the opening movement, quiet, gentle, but carrying within it every essential note needed for a legend to be born. She was the one who lit the first flame, then stepped aside, allowing that light to shine the way it was meant to. And perhaps, without her, there would be no Andrea Bocelli as the world knows him today. In the early years after their wedding, the life of Andrea Bocelli and Enrica Cenzati unfolded with a simplicity almost unbelievable for a man who would later become a legend. They lived in a small home in Tuscany, with a sunlit garden, heavy grapevines, and a living room always filled with the laughter of two little boys. Bocelli attended vocal lessons in the morning, played piano in bars at night, returned home late, yet always greeted by a warm meal and gentle hands. Amos and Matteo were born into that atmosphere. A quiet peace that never needed applause, a happiness that required no spotlight, only two parents and the sound of music flowing through the house each night. But when Bocelli stepped onto the Sanremo stage in 1994, and the world soon discovered him, the rhythm of their life began to shift, little by little, like two melodies once perfectly aligned now drifting into different tempos. Enrica, with her introverted nature and sensitive heart, always chose the back row of life, avoiding cameras, shying away from crowds, uncomfortable with attention. Bocelli, though not hungry for fame, had no choice but to follow where music led him. Grand theaters, stadiums, red carpets, interviews, connecting flights. These two worlds moved side by side at first, but the distance between them widened, like a breath that was no longer in sync. There were nights when Enrica sat alone in a quiet kitchen, the children long asleep, the dinner she saved for her husband cooling until it lost all flavor. Bocelli, meanwhile, was in another city, standing before thousands, trying to drown out his homesickness by singing harder, longer, using his voice to fill the emptiness he could not admit. People often say pressure comes from what we lack, but in their case, pressure came from what they once had, a happiness too pure, too fragile, to survive the weight of rising fame. Success came so quickly that even Bocelli struggled to make sense of it. From small bar performances, he suddenly found himself on massive stages, touring across Europe, becoming a sought-after name in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Japan. He was no longer singing only for Enrica in their little room. He was singing for the entire world. And the farther he traveled, the more he felt an invisible rope pulling taut between two ends. One was the artistic dream he could never turn away from, and the other was the home he never wanted to leave. Enrica loved him in a way very different from the women of show business. She loved the fragile parts, the quiet parts, the human parts of him. But as time went on, the world loved the larger-than-life part of Bocelli, and that part slowly consumed more and more of his life. There was no betrayal, no harsh words, no loss of affection, only a truth every couple living under the weight of fame eventually understands. Sometimes love does not die from conflict. It dies from a distance that no longer has space to close. The trips grew longer, the concerts more frequent. Enrica gradually realized that the man she loved now belonged to two worlds. One small world of family, and one enormous world she could never step into. She did not want to become part of that brightness, not out of jealousy, but because her nature had never belonged to anything that could blind her. Andrea Bocelli once said he understood what was happening when he returned home from a long tour and realized that his chair at the dinner table no longer felt like a natural part of the room. No arguments, no tears, just a quiet but undeniable truth. He had gone too far. Their marriage did not end with an explosion, but with a quiet fading. And it was that silence, not accusations, not bitterness, that made them both understand they were standing at opposite ends of a road they once believed would never split. They still loved each other, still respected each other, but that alone was no longer enough to hold a family together under the weight of a life that had grown too big. And so, like every relationship that has reached its natural limit, they faced the most painful but truest decision. That moment led to the next chapter, one that very few people ever saw, because it did not happen under stage lights, but in a small room in Tuscany, where two young boys were still too little to understand why their parents no longer walked in the same rhythm. When their marriage reached a point where silence spoke louder than words, where distance outweighed closeness, Andrea Bocelli and Enrica Cenzati understood that love was no longer enough to keep them under the same roof. But what made their separation different? And what made it one of the saddest yet most beautiful chapters of Bocelli's life was the way they walked away from each other, not through pain, but through gratitude for what had once been. They did not blame each other, did not turn divorce into a battlefield. They simply acknowledged, gently, that life had pushed them to opposite shores, and the kindest thing they could do for one another was to let go the right way. The break came in 2002, a year when Bocelli's career had already soared far beyond the quiet world where it began, and the distance between two people who once loved each other through the simplest things had grown into a road impossible to bridge. But instead of resisting, Enrica accepted it quietly. She did not cling, did not pressure him, did not provoke the desperate last argument so common in collapsing marriages. She understood that love sometimes ends not because people stop loving, but because they no longer live the same life. And she also understood that Bocelli, the man she had supported since his days playing piano in bars, was stepping into a life too vast for her to walk beside. When the decision to divorce was made, Bocelli could not hide his pain, but what he remains most grateful for is the way Enrica protected their family, even as it was falling apart. She kept the media away from their story, shielded him from rumors, and never once spoke ill of him, not even in a whisper. She chose silence as her final act of love, preserving the dignity of the father of her children, refusing to let bitterness stain his name. After signing the divorce papers, Enrica did not leave Bocelli's world. She simply stepped back, far enough for him to live a new life, yet close enough so he could see his two sons whenever he wished. She chose to stay in the same area, just a few minutes' drive from his villa. She took Amos and Matteo to school, kept their lives as normal as possible, protected them from cameras and rumors, and never once used them as leverage or as proof of anything to the public. Years later, when Matteo stood on major stages, singing alongside his father, the media finally understood that behind that brilliance was a mother who chose to stay outside the spotlight so her children could have two versions of their father, one in music and one in everyday life, both whole and present. The most remarkable detail, and the one few people know, is that in 2014, when Bocelli married Veronica Berti, Enrica attended the wedding, not as the ex, but as a part of the family, a woman who understood deeply that love does not always need possession to continue existing. Her quiet presence said more than any speech ever could. She not only accepted the closed chapter of the past, but also respected the new path chosen by the man who had once been the center of her world. In Bocelli's life, Enrica may not be the loudest movement in the symphony, but she is perhaps the most dignified one. Because in the moment of breaking, when people often become small, she chose to become larger. And it was precisely because of this grace that Bocelli could move forward without carrying bitterness, eventually building a new family where love and music continued to bloom. Without Enrica, there would be no Amos and Matteo, no years when Bocelli was loved in the simplest, purest way, and perhaps not even the man he is today. A musician cherished not only for his voice, but for the humanity that radiates from a private life shaped by women like her. And in that quiet space, after the separation, when Bocelli found himself standing between two shores, between a closed past and an uncertain future. Another woman stepped into his life, opening a completely different chapter, stronger, deeper, and just as destined. After his quiet divorce from Enrica, Andrea Bocelli entered a period he once described as the space between two notes, a long stretch of silence in which dazzling concerts were no longer enough to cover the emptiness waiting for him each night when he returned to a large house, missing children's laughter and the warmth of a meal left on the table. He was not a man who sought new love immediately. On the contrary, Bocelli withdrew into himself, leaning on music as his only anchor, drinking less, walking more, letting life pass without allowing anyone to step into the private world that had just fallen apart. But life has its special moments, moments when, prepared or not, fate places a new path in front of us. And for Bocelli, that path had a name: Veronica Berti. They met in 2002 at a dinner Bocelli later said came with no warning. Veronica was only 18, a young woman with intelligent eyes, an unusual calmness, and a soft yet powerful energy that made anyone across from her feel at ease from the first moment. Bocelli, already in his 40s, had no intention of falling in love. He was simply seeking a gentle evening to fill the long hours between two tours. But when Veronica spoke, her voice low, clear, and far more mature than her age, he knew something was shifting. It wasn't a sudden spark or infatuation. It was a kind of peace that made him feel seen, even though he could not see her at all. Veronica did not come to fill the space Enrica left behind. She arrived like a new piece of music entirely her own, a different tempo, perfectly suited to the chapter Bocelli was stepping into. If Enrica was the simplicity of youth, then Veronica was the strength of adulthood. She did not fear the stage, did not fear crowds, did not fear that loving a world-famous man would swallow her own youth. On the contrary, she accepted it with a calmness that even Bocelli found astonishing. They slipped into a relationship quickly, not loud or dramatic, but quietly profound. What made their bond strong from the very beginning was not romance, it was understanding. Veronica saw Bocelli's loneliness more clearly than anyone else ever had. The nights he returned to cold hotel rooms after performances, the mornings he left Italy before sunrise, the moments when the applause faded and left behind a silence only great artists truly know. She didn't try to change him, didn't try to steal the spotlight, didn't try to make herself the center. She simply stood beside him at the right distance, at the right time, in the right way, and her presence alone was enough for Bocelli to feel that he was no longer standing alone. Later, she became Bocelli's manager, a role she stepped into not because she was the partner of a famous artist, but because she understood him more deeply than anyone who had ever worked with him. She knew when he needed quiet, when he needed rest, when he needed space to focus on his voice. Veronica filtered his schedule, chose his projects, protected his voice, and at times protected his heart. It is no coincidence that after 2002, Bocelli's career became steadier, more refined, and more emotional. Because behind him was a woman strong enough to shoulder the chaos so he could simply sing. In 2012, they welcomed their daughter, Virginia Bocelli. She was not just a child, she was a late blessing that life gave to a man who had walked through too many shadows. Bocelli once said that holding Virginia in his arms felt like being born a second time, a rare statement that revealed the full depth of his feelings for the woman who brought her into the world. And through Virginia, Bocelli's home regained the sounds he thought were gone forever. Tiny footsteps running across the yard, bursts of childlike laughter, and the sweet moments when his little girl sat on his lap as he practiced piano, touching the notes that she herself would later sing. In 2014, Veronica and Bocelli married in a ceremony in Tuscany, warm, private, and so simple that no one would have guessed it was the wedding of one of the most beloved voices in the world. When the few rare photos were released, what surprised the public most was not luxury, but the quiet presence of Enrica at the ceremony. It was a moment when 3 adults chose to place the happiness of 2 children above everything else, and a moment that proved love does not have to be something that hurts people. Veronica did not replace Enrica. She continued the part of the journey Enrica could no longer walk with him. If Enrica was the opening movement, then Veronica was the movement of maturity, stronger, more grounded, and carrying a different kind of gentleness. The gentleness of a woman who knew she was standing beside a legend, yet only wanted to keep that legend whole as a human being. Thanks to Veronica, Bocelli regained the part of life that the glitter of the stage once tried to swallow. The balance between art and family, between light and shadow, between past and future. And it was this love that opened the way to the next chapter of his story. The chapter of 3 children, 3 paths, and 3 completely different shades of light. If Andrea Bocelli's life is a journey of finding light in darkness, then his 3 children are the gentlest, quietest, yet most enduring lights, shining back toward the father who once had to learn to see the world, not with his eyes, but with his heart. From Amos, the calm, scientific soul of the family, to Matteo, the artist born from music itself, and finally Virginia, the late-blooming, radiant little rose. Each child is not just a chapter of Bocelli's life, but a mirror reflecting his own path of growth, loss, and rebirth. Amos, born in 1995, is not someone who seeks the spotlight, yet he is the one Bocelli calls the quietest mind in the family. From a young age, Amos chose not the path of singing, but the piano, as if it were a lifelong friend. His hands resemble his father's, long, soft, and sensitive enough that emotion turns into sound the moment he touches the keys. But what makes Amos remarkable is not only his music, it's the way he merges it with scientific intellect. While Matteo and Virginia appear before cameras, Amos stands in laboratories pursuing aerospace engineering, a field that sounds distant from an artistic family, yet fits his meticulous and thoughtful nature perfectly. He earned an engineering degree from the University of Pisa, worked with the European Space Agency, and contributed to several high-tech research projects. And yet, whenever his father needs him, Amos always returns to the piano, like at San Remo, where he sat beside Bocelli, hands on the keys and heart quietly keeping rhythm for the man he has always considered his greatest inspiration. Not loud, not showy, Amos is the family's silent pillar, the one who brings the light of intellect to balance the intensely emotional world of his father and younger siblings. Matteo, however, is entirely different. If Amos was born with the hands of an engineer, then Matteo carries the lungs and soul of an artist blessed by fate. As a child, he loved to sing, yet always avoided singing in front of his father, because that was a mountain too high to face. But destiny found him in the most natural way. During a meeting with producer David Foster, the very man who helped shape Bocelli's career, Foster looked at Matteo for a moment and said, "You have a voice the world needs to hear." And just like that, Matteo stepped onto the path he was perhaps born to follow. In 2018, the world discovered Matteo when father and son performed "Fall on Me," a song that felt like a musical conversation between 2 generations. Bocelli's voice was like the Tuscan fog, deep and vast. Matteo's voice was bright like the Italian morning sun. That harmony made millions around the world cry, not just because of the music, but because they saw in it something every father and son long for, a natural, unforced connection, an understanding between two souls standing on opposite sides of life. When Matteo released his debut album in 2023, with Chasing Stars written specifically for him by Ed Sheeran, the public understood that Matteo was no longer just Bocelli's son. He was stepping into the world on his own feet. A young, handsome, modern artist with a fresh spirit who still honors his father's legacy with all his heart. For Bocelli, Matteo is the light of pride. The light that reminds him music can continue even when his own voice may one day fall silent. And then came Virginia, the youngest, yet the one who made Bocelli feel born again, as he once said. Virginia is not just a daughter. She is the gift life handed him after he had endured enough loss to finally recognize a miracle when it appeared. She first sang publicly at only 8 years old, performing Hallelujah with her father during a global live stream. No one expected such a delicate little girl to possess a voice so proud, pure but not fragile, soft yet confident, as if she had spent her whole life on stage. Beyond music, Virginia is a rhythmic gymnastics athlete with multiple medals, a young model who has walked runways, and a child who constantly surprises audiences with her range of talents. Within the family, she is warmth itself, the one who pulls Bocelli back to the simplest things: family dinners, horseback rides, quiet Sunday mornings sitting side by side at the piano. When Bocelli postponed his tour due to health issues in 2023, it was Virginia who sat next to him through his practice sessions, sometimes placing her hand on his shoulder as if to say, "You don't have to be strong all the time." All three children, Amos, Matteo, and Virginia, walk three different paths, yet they share one truth. They do not just continue Bocelli's legacy, they expand it, renew it, transforming it into the story of an entire family rather than a single artist. Amos brings intellect, Matteo brings creative fire, and Virginia brings the purity of a new generation, together forming a harmony that Bocelli himself often calls the most beautiful music of my life. Because while his career placed him on the world stage, it was his three children who brought him back to the stage of his own life, where he is not an icon, not the tenor of the century, but simply a father, sitting at the piano, listening to his children's laughter as the shadows of life turn into light. At 66, Andrea Bocelli was no longer an artist chasing success, nor a man running from the shadows of his youth. He had become a global icon who had touched every peak music could possibly offer. But just when the world believed he was complete, settled, untouchable, quiet waves began to rise beneath the surface. These were subtler challenges, quieter storms, no longer the sharp pains of youth, but the final tests of a life shaped by both brilliance and darkness. And then came the moment Bocelli once described perfectly. It's not the voice that defines an artist, but how they rise after being misunderstood. In 2020, when the pandemic swept across the globe and Italy became the epicenter of Europe, Bocelli, a man who had spent his entire life soothing pain through music, was suddenly dragged into a storm not of sound, but of public judgment. A single comment at the Italian Senate, spoken out of heartbreak over seeing citizens locked inside their homes for so long, was cut, twisted, taken out of context, and spread at a speed even he could not have imagined. Within hours, the man once considered Italy's pride was recast as a symbol of defiance, of irresponsibility, even though the truth was nowhere to be found in the headlines screaming his name. People forgot that he himself had contracted the virus and recovered quietly. They forgot he was speaking out of concern for children without playgrounds. The elderly unable to see their families, households drowning in fear and deprivation so severe that crying became louder than any fear of illness. He had simply voiced what any humane artist would say: "Do not let fear make us lose each other." But the media, as always, cared little for the heart behind the words, only the slogan they could turn into headlines. Bocelli, a man so gentle he had avoided conflict his entire career, suddenly had to do something he never believed he would: apologize before millions. Not because he was wrong, but because he understood that in a moment of global chaos, a single misunderstood word could wound hearts that were already breaking. And to avoid hurting anyone further, he took the blame upon himself. Perhaps that was the heaviest moment of his life. Heavier even than the dark years of his childhood or the pressure-filled performances when he once confessed, "There were times I was afraid of my own stage." But just a few months later, the world would fall to its knees before him, in the most beautiful way. On April 12, 2020, Bocelli stood inside the Milan Cathedral, a space that can hold 40,000 people, in absolute emptiness. No orchestra, no audience, no applause, only a blind man standing before a statue of Christ, with sunlight passing through stained glass like drifting mist, lifting his voice in amazing grace. 180 million people watched live, millions cried, and the world understood. Bocelli was not speaking against suffering. He was singing to pull humanity out of it. That performance didn't just restore his dignity. It restored the hope of millions trapped in small apartments, drowning in fear, overwhelmed by relentless news. As his voice rose inside the empty cathedral, even those who had criticized him fell silent, because they realized that some voices are not meant for controversy. They are meant for hope. But the challenges awaiting Bocelli did not come only from the public. At 66, his body began sending signals he could no longer ignore. At the end of 2023, just hours before stepping onto the Boston stage, he was forced to cancel the concert because he could not produce a voice. In Philadelphia, Bocelli sat beside the piano and allowed Virginia and the accompanying musicians to sing in his place, an image that made audiences feel tenderness rather than disappointment. Later, he admitted he was experiencing health challenges, and doctors warned that if he continued singing in that condition, he could lose his voice forever. For an ordinary performer, that would be a career risk. For Bocelli, it was like being cut off from the world that gave his life meaning. Yet, he did not complain, did not blame age, did not dramatize the situation. He simply said one sentence that made the entire world fall silent. "I must preserve my voice the way an athlete preserves his legs." At 66, he understood he was no longer in an era of running fast. He was learning to run slow so he could go further. Each morning, he practiced not to maintain his status in the music world, but to keep a promise to himself. If he still had one day left to sing, he would sing as if it were his final thank you to life. And as his steps grew slower, his children, Amos, Mateo, and Virginia, stepped forward faster, brighter, as if preparing to lift the torch he had carried for 4 decades. For Bocelli, these pivotal years were not a decline. They were the moment he could watch his legacy blossom while he was still alive. But it was also the moment he had to face the question every great artist eventually confronts near the end of their path. If one day I can no longer sing, what will remain of me? Bocelli did not answer with logic. He answered with the way he lived. With mornings spent riding horses through the Tuscan vineyards, with simple dinners with Veronica and Virginia, with moments backstage listening to Mateo sing while smiling quietly, with long, wordless minutes beside Amos at the piano. At 66, Bocelli no longer feared the darkness. because he had come to understand that light does not come from the eyes, but from the way a person faces the final chapters of their own life. And in that calmness, in a voice that sometimes trembled just slightly, Bocelli became more beautiful than ever. Not as a stage legend, but as a human being learning to let go of what is too heavy, hold on to what is truly worth keeping, and sing with all the gratitude that only a heart that has walked through darkness can possess. When people look back on Andrea Bocelli's life, they often remember the dazzling stages, the endless standing ovations, or the love songs that became the memories of an entire generation. But his true legacy does not lie in record sales, nor in international awards. It lies in the way he used darkness to teach the world about light. Because if other artists inspire admiration through talent, Bocelli inspires belief in kindness, patience, and courage. Qualities that seem quiet, yet echo the farthest in a human life. For more than 30 years, the blind man from Tuscany has done what no one ever thought possible, bringing opera to the masses without losing its purity, turning classical music into a language of emotion, so universal that the whole world, young or old, rich or poor, can understand it. And most importantly, proving that art is not the privilege of the perfect, but a gift for those willing to lift one another up. Yet the greatest legacy he leaves behind is not the recordings or the concerts. It is the people who now walk in his footsteps. Amos, with his quiet intellect and the kindness inherited from his father, opens a path in science, while keeping the roots of music alive in his soul. Matteo, with confidence and a voice marked by his own identity, shows the world that the shadow of a legend is not a barrier. It is a launching pad. And Virginia, the 12-year-old girl who sang Hallelujah beside her father, is living proof that light is not something that fades last, but something that can be passed on from one generation to the next. Each child is a new chapter in the book Bocelli has written with his entire life, showing that music is never a solitary road, but a thread that binds together the hearts fate has placed side by side. Beyond his family, there are millions of people across the world who have cried, healed, and rediscovered hope through his voice. To them, Bocelli is not just a singer. He is a storyteller made of sound, a reminder that even when life turns off every light, there is still a way to find the path. He cannot see the faces of those who listen to him, yet they see themselves reflected in his voice. And that is a gift only artists born from pain can offer. Today, even though age has placed a slight ache in his voice, Bocelli continues to stand on stage with the calm of someone who understands the true worth of time. He sings not to prove anything, not to surpass anyone, but to say thank you to a life that once took away his sight, yet gave him an entire world to love. And it is that gratitude that has turned his career into something far greater than music, a reminder that human beings can lose many things, but never the ability to light their own lives. From Andrea Bocelli's journey, you understand that light does not come from the eyes. It comes from the way a person chooses to rise after darkness. And in the end, when his voice finally quiets, the light he leaves behind will not live on the stage, but in the hearts of every person who has ever listened to him, even once in their life. So tell me, when you listen to Andrea Bocelli, what light have you found for yourself? Share your feelings below. And don't forget to send a word of gratitude to the man who turned darkness into one of the world's most beautiful gifts. And remember to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next heartfelt stories about the legends you love.